No one shines in the Star Trek universe quite like the incredible women serving on the Enterprise D. Let's talk about it. We first meet Head of Security Tasha Yar serving on the bridge when the ship runs into a space net. Turns out this is a trap set up by Q in order to start his trial against humanity. During the trial, Tasha stands up and passionately defends Starfleet's honor. You see, Tasha grew up on a colony where gangs would run rampant and commit sexual assault against anything that moved. Somehow she was rescued by Starfleet and ended up working her way through the ranks. And now they have her complete loyalty. Not only is Q not moved by this passionate speech, but he also responds by turning her into a popsicle. To be fair, there was a lot of freezing going on back then, but I digress. Not long after returning to the ship, Tasha gets kidnapped and forced to fight to the death for the love of her kidnapper. The only thing fiercer than the battle is Urina's outfit. And that's literally the only good thing I can say about that episode. Tasha goes on to fight many more battles and is quick to save the day with a well-placed high kick or some spontaneous phaser fire. At least until she meets Armus. Basically, he's the collection of every negative emotion, feeling, thought shed, and it just compiled into this big pile of Armus. Somehow, this creature is able to kill Tasha with a gust of wind. Sadly, it seems like her story ends here in the least heroic warrior type of way possible. During her funeral, a holographic Tasha gives a fond farewell to each and every one of her friends, and it's so bittersweet. Afterwards, as people are filing away, Data and Picard share this moment where Data tells him that his life seems emptier without her there, and he wonders, did he somehow miss the point of the funeral? And Picard tells him, no, that's it. Thankfully, Tasha's story does not end here. We get to see her again after the Enterprise D encounters a temporal rift where the Enterprise C pops out. Upon arriving, the entire timeline is changed, and Tasha is back to being the chief security officer serving on the bridge. The only one who knows that things are not as they should be is Guinan, of course. She convinces Picard to send the Enterprise C back into the rift to restore the proper timeline. She also spills the beans to Tasha that not only did Tasha die, but that her death was meaningless and pointless and dumb, which we could have told her. With this in mind, Tasha decides to join the crew of the Enterprise C to help them fight in the battle in their own timeline. Now, she's well aware that this ship will most likely be instantly destroyed, but at least she can give them a fighting chance, and her death will have meaning, which she totally deserves. And that's exactly what she does. She goes back, the timeline is restored, and all is well. But her story doesn't end there. After going back in time, instead of being immediately killed, Tasha is actually captured along with a whole host of other prisoners of war from the Enterprise C. While serving in some labor camp or something, a Romulan general catches her eye and says, "Hey Tasha, marry me or I'll kill all the other prisoners." So Tasha, being Tasha, says, okay. A few years later, they have a baby girl named Selah. And a few years after that, Tasha decides to make a break for it with Selah under her arms. Now at this point, Selah is 4 and she's old enough to know that something is amiss. She doesn't want to leave the only home she's ever known. So she calls out and the Romulan guards find Tasha, stop them, and summarily execute her. Selah is proud of what she's done because in her eyes, Tasha was completely disloyal to the Romulans, which, you know, fair, she was. So in the most unique of ways, Tasha's story ends, but even with Tasha's life cut tragically short, she still has the death that a warrior deserves. So I guess that's a silver lining. Hey, if you want more Star Trek centered content just like this, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you find out when my very next deep dive video drops. Now let's get back to it. Next we have Dr. Katherine Pulaski. I don't want to talk about her, but we need to talk about her. By the way, drop it in the comments if you are Team Pulaski. Pulaski originally joins the crew to replace Dr. Crusher, who's gone on to work at Starfleet Medical. The very first case that Dr. Pulaski takes on involves Counselor Troi becoming unexpectedly pregnant by a floating ball of light. More on that later. Pulaski's personality can best be described as salty. This can best be seen in the way that she refuses to get Data's name right and keeps mispronouncing it as Data. Despite that, she apparently still has some kind of of charm, at least according to Commander Riker's father, Kyle. Turns out they once had a pretty serious thing going on. Imagine if she was actually Riker's stepmom when she joined the crew. That would make this character so much more interesting to me. Anywho, not only does Pulaski manage to charm Kyle Riker, but she also charms James Moriarty when he becomes sentient inside of a holodeck program that Data designed. Well, I don't know if charmed is the right word, but he at least feels compelled to make her a soothing cup of tea after he kidnaps her. The last time we see Pulaski is when she is desperately trying to save Riker's life from yet another pathogen. This pathogen forces him to relive all of the memories from his past, so it's Pulaski's job to find the right combination of flashbacks to save his life. Riker is saved, and the next time we visit sickbay, suddenly Beverly Crusher is back, and there is no word from Pulaski, not even a goodbye note. We never find out what happens to Dr. Pulaski. In fact, her name is never spoken again on Star Trek: The Next Generation. If you have a guess about where she ended up, drop it in the comments. My personal guess is that she retires to Risa for a colorful life full of Jamaharon. Next, we have Ro Laron, a Bajoran Starfleet officer with a troubled past, to say the least. Ro grows up in an impoverished refugee camp because the Cardassians have occupied her homeworld and basically scattered the Bajoran people all over the galaxy. Somehow she makes it to and through Starfleet Academy, only to lead a catastrophic away mission, which ultimately lands her in a penal colony. Captain Picard is forced to take her on board in order to help flush out a suspected Bajoran terrorist named Orta. While on board, Ro faces dirty looks and backhanded comments from almost everyone, except for Guinan. Guinan forcibly befriends her and convinces Ro to tell Picard what's really going on. Inside his ready room, she tells him a story about when she was a child, she saw her father get tortured to death, and that experience made her ashamed of who she is, but now she's reclaimed her identity. She appreciates and values her heritage. And when Admiral Kennelly gave her the opportunity to make a real difference in the Bajorans' fight against Cardassia, she had to say yes. So now Picard is like, hold up, wait a minute, what exactly did Admiral Kennelly tell you to promise Orta in order to get his cooperation? To which Ro responds, weapons, of course. Captain Picard is like, no, never. A Starfleet admiral could never do something so wrong. Should I tell him or do you want to? Ultimately, Picard teams up with Ro and Orta to try to get to the bottom of this whole thing and expose the truth. Turns out the Cardassians were playing Admiral Kennelly the whole time. They had him convinced that Orta and all of his people were attacking Federation colonies and that they had to join forces in order to flush him out and end the violence. In reality, the Cardassians themselves attacked those Starfleet outposts just to get Admiral Kennelly on their side. Presumably a court-martial or something ensues for Admiral Kennelly. All I know is that Picard ends up inviting Ro to join the crew officially, and she does so under one condition, that she is allowed to wear the jewelry that represents her Bajoran heritage. Easily one of my favorite moments. What I love about Ro is that she goes against the grain of happy-go-lucky Starfleet officers, but she has to learn how to play well with others. She develops a great relationship with Guinan, who even helps her get a little bit of a do-over with her childhood. She also has the time of her afterlife with Geordi when an accident puts both of them out of phase with the rest of the crew. She even hooks up with Riker at one point. And yeah, it's weird, but no matter what, Ro always stays true to her values. When we last see Ro, she is tasked with infiltrating a group fighting against the Cardassians. The Maquis are composed of a bunch of civilian colonists who live on the border of Cardassian space, along with several former Federation Starfleet officers. Even though Ro knows her job is to end further violence, she can't help but feel a kinship with these people and really resonate with their mission. In a surprise move to no one except for Picard, Ro decides to defect from Starfleet and join the Maquis for real. While this decision does seem to hurt Picard, I think Riker understands and respects Ro for her decision. Next we have the one, the only, Guinan. Guinan comes from a long-lived alien species, but when we first meet her, she's working in 10 forward. She tends bar and she listens. Because of the way that she is always there with a kind word of wisdom or a helpful hint, I consider her to be the unofficial ship's counselor. We get the first real taste of this when Guinan helps Picard process the idea of Data being treated as property instead of a person. She also counsels Picard when the infamous Q hurtles the Enterprise into uncharted regions of space to meet the Borg. Borg. Now, the Borg were single-handedly responsible for destroying Guinan's homeworld and scattering the members of her people who remained. So she's understandably upset about what Q just did. During a later run-in with the Borg, she also counsels Riker to step up and captain the ship after Captain Picard is assimilated. Another one of her superpowers is being able to tell when a temporal shift has happened. For example, when Tasha Yar comes suddenly back to life. The only time this isn't true is when Data surprises her at a dinner party at Mark Twain's house. Even though she does not initially sense that the crew is from the future, she's flexible enough to roll with it. And ultimately, she helps them complete their mission and get back to their timeline. She also shares a special moment with Picard that I still don't really understand. You know, it's funny because Guinan joins the crew the exact same time that Dr. Pulaski joins the crew, but she's so iconic and impactful that in my heart, it feels like she's been there since day one. Next, we have the official ship's counselor and token Betazoid, Deanna Troi. Deanna's mother is Betazoid and her father is human, which means that she cannot read a non-telepath's mind the way that her mom can, but she can read emotions. You would think this ability would come in much more handy than it actually does. Anyway, when we first meet Deanna, she is sensing something really strange on Farpoint Station. At the same time, she's unexpectedly reunited with her long-lost love, Commander Riker. He seems to be pretty over it, but she seems thirsty AF. Eventually, the crew discovers that the strange things happening at Farpoint Station are all due to a space jelly that's been trapped on the surface. The crew is able to give the space jelly enough energy to escape the surface and go live out its best life with its space boo. It's at this point that Deanna senses great joy and gratitude at their reunion. But things are still on shaky ground when it comes to her and her own Imzadi. In fact, it's not until we meet Deanna's surprise fiance that Riker's true and lingering feelings for Deanna finally come out. But after her arranged marriage doesn't really work out, she and Riker go back to just being friends with benefits. I think Deanna wins the award for most traumatized crew member, and ironically, the person most in need of a counselor. For example, she gets impregnated by a ball of light against her will. Not only that, but she carries his baby to term and raises him until he's about 8 years old. Granted, this all happens in a matter of days, but still. Then he dies, turns back into a ball of light, and leaves the ship forever, leaving Deanna completely brokenhearted. Unfortunately, after this, the hits just keep on coming. At one point, Deanna actually loses her empathic abilities and feels just like she's lost a limb. Thankfully, she is ultimately able to discover that there's more to her than being the ship's only empath. Later, she's telepathically assaulted by a total scumbag who puts her and several other crew members into a coma as a result of his assault. Thankfully, Geordi and Data are able to discover that Jev is the one who's behind all these assaults just in time to save the recently recovered Troi from yet another assault. Thankfully, Deanna's story is not all heartbreak and assault. During one crazy ship disaster, she actually ends up as the captain of the Enterprise. She leans on other crew members for tactical support and advice, but at the end of the day, she makes the calls. That little taste of command empowers her to go on to take the Bridge Officer's Test to qualify for promotion to commander. During the hardest part of that test, she discovers that being in command means that sometimes you have to sacrifice a few crew members in order to save all the rest. She goes through so many things, I can't even cover it all in one conversation. So if there are any Deanna Troi moments that you love that I did not cover in this video, be sure to drop it in the comments. Next, we have Dr. Beverly Crusher, who, along with her son Wesley, was single-handedly saving the ship every other week in the beginning. For example, when a virus spreads drunken behavior all throughout the ship, Beverly is also affected. But even in this altered state, she is still able to create an antidote that can sober everyone up. One of her superpowers is her intelligence, along with her resourcefulness. When trapped on a hostile planet that won't stop attacking them, Beverly gets injured, but is still able to direct Captain Picard in how to take care of her and tend her wounds. Later on, she is trapped in a warp bubble on the ship where everyone else keeps disappearing mysteriously. She quickly realizes that if there's nothing wrong with her, there must be something wrong with the universe. While this is one of the most self-centered things I have ever heard anyone say, turns out she's actually right. And one of the things I love about Beverly is the way she always stands up for what she thinks is right. For example, the Enterprise comes into contact with two alien species that have a symbiotic relationship with one another. While everyone else believes that one planet is dying from a lethal disease and the other planet is providing the life-saving medication, it's Beverly who discovers that that medication is actually a highly addictive narcotic. When she discovers this, her first thought is to go to the planet where people are suffering and try to wean them off of the narcotics in a way way that is safe and less painful than going cold turkey. But Picard won't hear it. He tells Beverly that doing that would directly break the Prime Prime Directive. So instead, here's what Picard decides to do. They only have one busted, raggedy ship that can actually transport anything between the planets, and that ship breaks down. Picard simply refuses to fix the ship so that both planets will now be on their own to figure stuff out. And in his mind, this does not break the Prime Directive at all. Later, when Lieutenant Worf suffers a paralyzing injury, Beverly is appalled when a visiting doctor uses Worf as some kind of guinea pig to test her theories, and ultimately ends up killing him. Thankfully, Worf's redundant Klingon systems bring him back to life, and incredibly, Dr. Russell takes that as a sign that her experimental ideas were actually a complete success. Beverly is disgusted by her, and so am I. Now, while Beverly's medical decision-making is on point, her romantic decision-making, not so much. She does meet a man who I think is perfect for her. The crew discovers a crash shuttle with one sort of survivor whose body seems to have these incredible regenerative qualities. Unfortunately, he also has amnesia, so they just call him John Doe. Slowly but surely, they kind of fall for each other. But of course, it doesn't last. After discovering that his hands have healing abilities, John Doe suddenly remembers exactly who he is and exactly what he was doing when his shuttle crashed. And that's when he turns into a non-corporeal energy being and leaves the ship forever. Now that was actually a good choice for Beverly, but this next one, horrible, terrible choice. Worst choice she's ever made. After her Nana's funeral, Beverly uncovers a series of diaries and, like any good granddaughter, proceeds to read them all. She discovers that her 80-something-year-old grandmother was having this steamy love affair with a 30-something-year-old guy from the planet named Ronan. Shortly after this revelation, Beverly meets Ronan for herself and begins a steamy love affair with him as well. For some reason, Deanna does not tell her that this is a terrible idea. It's not until Ronan causes Beverly to quit her job, reanimates her dead grandmother in her casket, and tries to kill Geordi and Data that she finally decides to end things with him once and for all. And since he's mostly green smoke and a sexy voice, all she has to do is hit it with a little phaser fire to get rid of him forever. One relationship with a lot of potential happens between Beverly and a Trill named Odan. They are passionately in love and so happy together. Unfortunately, Odan's symbiote is dying inside of him, so he needs a new body. The symbiote is transferred a couple of times, but in the end, Beverly decides to call things off. She says that she just can't keep up with these drastic changes that keep happening to his body. They part as friends, and we sadly never see Odan again. Speaking of friends with romantic feelings, one of the most unsatisfying romances she has is with Captain Picard. It's like a sneeze that just won't sneeze. After being kidnapped and imprisoned by hostile aliens, Beverly and Picard are implanted with a device that allows them to share their thoughts and feelings with each other. Apparently, Picard is in love with her and has been in love with her ever since they met, but he feels like it would be disloyal to Jack Crusher if he ever makes a move, so he doesn't make a move. Later, we see a glimpse that in the future, the two of them get married. Yay! But we only know that because Beverly is now going by Captain Picard, and Captain Picard is now going by Admiral Picard. We learn pretty quickly that at this point, they're already divorced. Boo! So yeah, we never actually see them together, and I don't know how I feel about that. Did you ever want to see Picard and Beverly as an actual couple on the show? Let me know in the comments. By the way, if you like this, you're gonna love my next video.